Captain Dong-Woo. Kim pressed his face against the cold metal of the observation window. Stars stretched endlessly before him, tiny dots of light in the vast darkness of space. 20 years had passed since he last saw another human face. 20 long years of silence and emptiness. The space station. Harmony drifted slowly through the void. Once it had been home to 3,000 people. Scientists, engineers, families with children who laughed in the corridors. Now only Dong-Woo remained, walking through empty halls where his footsteps echoed like ghostly whispers. He moved away from the window and walked toward the control room. His boots made soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. The lights flickered, sometimes, but he had learned to fix them. He had learned to fix everything on this dying station. The control room hummed with the sound of old machines. Screens showed green numbers and blue lines that told him the station was still alive. Barely alive, but alive. Dong-Woo sat in his chair and looked at the main screen. It showed the same thing it had shown for 20 years. Empty space, no ships, no signals, nothing. He touched a button and heard a familiar voice. "Good morning, Captain Kim. All systems are running normally. Life support is at 60%. Food supplies will last another 2 years." The voice belonged to the station computer. Dong-Woo had changed its voice settings long ago to sound like his sister Hyejin. She had died in the evacuation. Crushed. When the transport ship exploded, sometimes he forgot it was just a machine talking to him. "Thank you, Hyejin," he said out loud. His voice sounded strange in the quiet room. He had not spoken to anyone real in so long that sometimes he forgot how his own voice sounded. Dong-Woo stood up and walked to the food storage area. The shelves held rows of silver packages, protein bars, vitamin drinks, and dried vegetables. The same food he had eaten for 20 years. He picked up a protein bar and bit into it. It tasted like cardboard, but it kept him alive. As he ate, he remembered the day everything changed, the day the Vorthons came to Earth. He had been young, then full of hope and dreams. The evacuation ships had come to take everyone away to safety. Dong-Woo was supposed to be on the last transport, but the ship had been attacked before he could board. He watched from the station as the transport exploded in a ball of fire. His friends, his colleagues, his sister Hyejin, all gone in an instant. The other evacuation ships had already left. He was alone. The Vorthons had invaded Earth after that. Dong-Woo had received the last transmission from the planet 3 days later. Then silence. Complete silence. For the first year, he had tried to contact other human ships. He sent messages into space every day, hoping someone would answer. Sometimes he thought he heard voices in the static, but they were just his imagination playing tricks on him. After 5 years, he stopped trying to contact anyone. After 10 years, he stopped hoping for rescue. After 15 years, he accepted that he might be the only human left in this part of the galaxy. But he did not give up. That was not the human way. That was not his way. Dong-Woo walked through the station's corridors, checking systems and making repairs. The hydroponics lab where he grew small vegetables. The water recycling plant that turned his waste into clean water. The power generator that ran on fusion cells he had salvaged from abandoned ships. Over the years, many ships had drifted past the station. Most were empty, their crews long dead or evacuated. Dong-Woo had become an expert at spacewalking, moving from ship to gather supplies. Food, spare parts, fuel cells, anything useful. He had found bodies sometimes. Human bodies floating in the cold vacuum of space. He always brought them back to the station and gave them proper burials by launching them toward the nearest star. It seemed like the right thing to do. In the workshop, Dong-Woo worked on his latest project, a communication array made from parts of 30 different ships. It was more powerful than the station's original equipment. If anyone was out there, this would find them. The work kept his hands busy and his mind focused. When he was not working, his thoughts became dark and lonely. Work was medicine for the soul. As he soldered wires and connected circuits, Dongwu thought about Earth. Was it still there? Were the Vordens still there? Had humanity found a new home among the stars? These questions haunted him. But he had no answers. Sometimes he dreamed about voices calling his name. Human voices, warm and familiar. But when he woke up, there was only silence and the hum of machines. The station's computer spoke again. "Captain, it is time for your daily exercise." Dongwu smiled. He had programmed the computer to remind him to take care of his health. Without it, he might have given up long ago. He went to the exercise room and ran on the old treadmill while watching recordings of Earth's oceans on the wall screen. Later, he sat in his quarters and looked at pictures on his tablet. Photos of his family, his friends, the green hills of Korea, where he had grown up. They seemed like images from another life, another world. Before sleep, Dongwu always performed the same ritual. He walked to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans might still be alive. Somewhere out there, hope might still exist. "I am still here," he whispered to the darkness. "I am still waiting." The stars did not answer, but Dongwu did not expect them to. He had learned patience in 20 years of solitude. He had learned that sometimes waiting was the most human thing you could do. Tomorrow would be another day of repairs and routines and silence, but it would also be another day of survival, another day of keeping the light on in the darkness. Dongwu. Kim was the last man standing, and he would stand until the end. The alarm screamed through the station like a wounded animal. Dongwu dropped his wrench and ran to the control room. His heart pounded as he looked at the screen. A ship was approaching. Not a dead hulk drifting through space, but a living ship with active engines and life signs. After 20 years of silence, someone had finally come. The ship was unlike anything Dongwu had ever seen. It looked organic, like a giant sea creature swimming through space. Its hull curved and flowed in smooth lines. Strange blue lights pulsed along its surface like a heartbeat. Dongwu's hands shook as he activated the communication system. Static filled the speakers for a moment. Then a voice came through, clear and strong. The voice spoke in perfect Korean. "Space Station Harmony, this is Commander Yuna Park requesting permission to dock." Dongwu stared at the radio in shock. A human voice. A Korean voice. A woman's voice speaking his native language after 20 years of silence. For a moment, he could not breathe. "This is Captain Dongwu Kim," he finally managed to say. "Permission granted. Docking Bay 2 is ready." His voice cracked like a teenager's. He cleared his throat and tried to sound more professional. "Commander Park, are you human?" There was a pause. "That is a complicated question, Captain Kim. I will explain when we meet." Dongwu watched through the cameras as the strange ship approached Docking Bay 2. It moved with impossible grace, sliding into the docking clamps without a sound. The ship's hull seemed to shimmer and change color as it settled into place. He ran to the docking bay, his boots echoing through the empty corridors. 20 years of solitude had not prepared him for this moment. What should he say? How should he act? His hands were sweating inside his work gloves. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss. Green lights indicated a good seal and breathable atmosphere on both sides. Dongwu stood back and waited as the inner door opened. A woman stepped through the airlock. She was tall and graceful, with long black hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore a dark blue uniform that seemed to be made of some kind of smart fabric. But there was something different about her, something that made Dongwu's skin crawl with unease. Her eyes were wrong. They glowed with a soft blue light, like stars seen through deep water. When she moved, it was too smooth, too perfect. No human moved like that. "Captain Kim," she said with a smile, "it is an honor to finally meet you." "Commander Park," Dongwu replied. He wanted to reach out and touch her, to make sure she was real, but something held him back. Are you really human? Yuna tilted her head like a bird studying a worm. I was human once. Now I am something more, and something less. She walked into the station, looking around with those strange, glowing eyes. You have done remarkable work keeping this place operational. 20 years alone would have driven most people insane. Most days I think it did, Dongwu said. He followed her through the corridors, watching the way she moved. Her feet barely seemed to touch the floor. Where did you come from? Are there other humans alive? Many questions, Yuna said. Let me start with the most important one. Yes, humans are alive. Scattered across a dozen star systems, but alive. They live under the protection of the Tylon Confederation. The Talon Confederation? An alliance of species that formed after the Vorthan Wars. Humans are junior members, but they are valued for their unique abilities. They reached the control room and Yuna looked at the displays with interest. She touched one of the screens and somehow interfaced with it directly. Data flowed across the display faster than any human eye could follow. Impressive modifications to the communication array, she said. You have been trying to contact survivors. For 20 years, Dongwu said. I never got an answer. Because your transmissions were being blocked. The Vorthans have monitoring stations throughout this sector. Any human communication would have brought them here. The Vorthans are still active? Yuna turned to face him. In the blue glow of the screens, her eyes looked even more alien. The Vorthans control Earth and 12 other systems. They are mining something from your homeworld, something that makes them incredibly powerful. Dongwu felt cold despite the station's warmth. What are they mining? That is why I am here, Captain Kim. The Confederation has been studying humans who refuse to evacuate. We call it the persistence phenomenon. You are the most extreme case we have found. I did not refuse to evacuate. My transport was destroyed. But you could have tried to leave. You could have taken one of the smaller ships that passed through this system. Instead, you stayed. You maintained your post. You kept the light on. Yuna walked closer to him. This close, Dongwu could see that her skin had a faint luminescent quality. She was beautiful in an inhuman way that made him uncomfortable. The Confederation needs someone like you, she said. Someone who can function alone under impossible conditions. Someone who never gives up. For what? To go back to Earth. To stop what the Vorthans are doing before they destroy not just your homeworld, but potentially the entire galaxy. Dongwu laughed, but it was not a happy sound. One man against an entire alien empire? That sounds like suicide. Not one man, Yuna said. You will have help. You will have me. She reached out and touched his hand. Her skin was warm but felt strange, like touching water that held its shape. I was human once, Captain Kim. The Confederation changed me so I could survive in hostile environments. I can breathe poison atmospheres. I can interface with alien technology. I can do things no normal human can do. What did they take from you? For the first time, sadness flickered across her perfect features. Many things, but they left me with one human trait. I still remember what it feels like to hope. Dongwu looked into her glowing eyes and saw something familiar there. Pain, loneliness, the same feelings that had kept him company for 20 years. Why me? He asked. Because you are the human who waited, who never stopped believing that someone would come. That kind of faith, that kind of stubborn hope, is exactly what we need. Outside the station, her organic ship pulsed with alien light. Inside, two beings who had once been human stood in the glow of computer screens and contemplated a mission that would either save the galaxy or destroy them both. When do we leave? Dongwu asked. Yuna smiled, and for just a moment she looked, completely human again. Tomorrow. Tonight we plan. Tonight you are no longer alone. Yuna led Dongwu through her ship's corridors. The walls seemed alive, pulsing with soft light that followed their movement. Everything was curved and smooth, like walking inside a living creature. The air smelled of ozone and something floral that Dongwu could not identify. "This is a Telan bioship," Yuna explained. "It grows rather than being built. The ship and I are connected through neural interfaces." They entered what must have been a briefing room. The walls showed images of space, but Dongwu realized they were not screens. The walls themselves were transparent, showing the real view, outside. Stars wheeled slowly as the ship rotated. "Sit," Yuna said, gesturing to a chair that formed itself from the floor. "You need to understand what happened to Earth." The walls changed, showing a blue and green planet Dongwu recognized as his homeworld. But something was wrong with the image. Massive scars covered the continents. The oceans were smaller than he remembered. "The Vorthons are not just conquerors," Yuna said. "They are harvesters. They search the galaxy for worlds that contain a specific type of energy." "What kind of energy?" "Consciousness, self-awareness, the spark that makes a being more than just matter and electricity." The image changed, showing deep excavations across Earth's surface. Huge machines burrowed into the planet's crust like metal worms. "The Vorthons discovered that Earth has the highest concentration of consciousness energy they have ever found. Not just from humans, but from all life that evolved there." Dongwu watched in horror as the machines grew larger and dug deeper. "They are destroying the planet. Worse than that, they are extracting the essence of what made Earth special. Every thought that was ever thought there, every dream that was ever dreamed, every moment of love or hope or determination. They are mining the very soul of your world." "For what purpose?" Yuna's glowing eyes dimmed with sadness. "Power. Consciousness energy can fuel their war machines for thousands of years. With Earth's energy, they could conquer the entire galaxy." The images changed again, showing vast Vorthon fleets spreading across star systems like a plague. Worlds burning, civilizations falling, entire species extinct or enslaved. "The Confederation has tried to stop them," Yuna continued. "But Vorthon technology is too advanced. Their ships are too fast. Their weapons are too powerful. Every direct attack has failed. So what makes you think we can succeed? Because we are not going to attack them directly. We are going to use their own extraction process against them." Yuna stood and walked to the transparent wall. She placed her hand on the surface, and new images appeared. Technical diagrams that hurt to look at. Machinery that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. "The consciousness extraction requires precise calibration," she said. "The Vorthons use human minds as templates to tune their equipment. They have been studying human psychological patterns for 20 years. Studying how? Captured humans, refugees who were caught during the evacuation. They have been kept alive in mental simulation chambers. Their minds are used to refine the extraction process." Dongwu felt sick. His friends, his colleagues, maybe even his sister, trapped in machines and used as tools. How many? Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. The simulations map every aspect of human consciousness: fear, anger, hope, despair. The Vorthons have created a perfect model of the human mind. And they use this model to extract consciousness from Earth? Yes. But here is what they do not understand. The human mind they have been studying is the mind of prisoners. Broken, people who have given up hope. They do not understand the mind of someone who refuses to surrender. Yuna turned back to Dongwu, her eyes bright with intense light. "They do not understand someone like you." The images changed one more time, showing a massive facility on Earth's surface. It looked like a metal mountain with roots that went deep into the planet's core. Energy flowed up through the roots like blood through veins. This is the primary extraction facility, Yuna said. It processes consciousness energy from the entire planet. If we can reach the core and introduce a different psychological pattern into the system, we can cause a feedback loop. What kind of feedback loop? Instead of extracting consciousness, the machines would broadcast it. Every human mind that has been studied, every fragment of human determination and creativity would be transmitted across the galaxy. Dongwu stared at the image of the facility. It was huge, surrounded by defenses and crawling with Vorthon forces. How do we get inside? That is where my modifications become useful. I can mimic Vorthon biosignatures. I can interface with their technology. I can survive in the toxic atmosphere that Earth has become. And what about me? You are the key to the whole plan. The Vorthon's equipment expects a broken human mind. Instead, you will give it a mind that has spent 20 years in isolation and never lost hope. A mind that has faced impossible odds and kept going. Yuna sat down across from him. For a moment, her alien features softened, and she looked almost human again. I will not lie to you, Captain Kim. This mission will probably kill us both. The facility is heavily guarded. The extraction chamber is filled with deadly radiation. Even if we succeed, the feedback loop might destroy us along with the Vorthon equipment. But if we do nothing, Earth dies. The galaxy falls. Humanity becomes extinct except for scattered refugees hiding in the dark. Dongwu was quiet for a long time. Outside the ship, stars wheeled slowly through space. Somewhere among those stars, humans were struggling to survive. Somewhere, his people were waiting for someone to light a candle in the darkness. How do we get to Earth without being detected? The ship has cloaking technology. We can approach through the asteroid field in Earth's outer system. The hard part will be getting from orbit to the surface. Landing ships, atmospheric entry. Pods. We will have to jump from orbit and hope the pod's stealth systems work. Dongwu almost laughed. Jump from orbit into a toxic atmosphere on a planet controlled by hostile aliens. Then infiltrate the most heavily defended facility in the galaxy and sabotage their most important equipment. That is the plan. It sounds impossible. Yuna smiled, and this time her smile was completely human. That is why they need someone who has spent 20 years doing impossible things. Someone who has kept a space station running with spare parts and determination. Someone who never gave up even when giving up was the only logical choice. When do we leave? Tomorrow. I need time to modify the ship's systems for atmospheric flight. You need time to study the facility plans and understand what we are walking into. Dongwu stood up, feeling the weight of 20 years of loneliness lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in decades, he was not alone. For the first time in decades, he had a purpose beyond simple survival. Commander Park, he said, what happens if we succeed? What happens to Earth? If we succeed, the consciousness energy returns to where it belongs. Earth heals. The galaxy remembers what it means to hope. And if we fail, then at least we fail trying. That is the most human thing we can do. Outside the ship, Earth waited, in the darkness, wounded and dying, but not yet dead. Two beings who had once been human made ready to return home, carrying with them the hopes of scattered refugees and the determination of a species that refused to surrender. The mission would begin tomorrow. Tonight they planned for the impossible. The bioship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. Dongwu pressed his face against the transparent wall and looked for the yellow star he remembered from childhood. When he found it, his heart broke a little. Even from this distance, the star looked wrong, dimmer than it should be. The Vorthons have built collection arrays around the sun, Yuna explained. She stood beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting starlight. They harvest solar energy to power their mining operations. As the ship moved deeper into the solar system, Dongwu saw more changes. Mars was covered with industrial complexes that glowed red against the planet's surface. The asteroid belt buzzed with mining ships and processing stations. Everything had been turned into a resource extraction operation. "How long do we have?" Dongwu asked. "According to Confederation intelligence, the core extraction will be complete in 6 months. After that, Earth will be a dead rock and the Vorthans will move on to their next target." The ship's bio-walls shifted to show tactical displays. Red dots marked Vorthan patrol ships. Blue lines showed safe approach vectors. Everything was calculated to avoid detection until the last possible moment. "There," Yuna said, pointing, at a blue marble that had once been home to billions of people. Earth. Dongwu barely recognized his homeworld. The planet was brown and gray instead of blue and green. The polar ice caps were gone. Massive storm systems covered most of the visible surface, and strange geometric shapes interrupted the natural curve of the continents. "What are those shapes?" "Extraction grids. They channel consciousness energy from the planet's surface to the primary facility." As they got closer, Dongwu could see the extraction grids in detail. They looked like circuit patterns carved into the Earth itself, hundreds of kilometers long and glowing with unnatural light. Where forests and cities had once stood, now, there were only these alien geometries. "The atmosphere is toxic," Yuna said. "Vorthan industrial processes have released chemicals that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. That is why I needed these modifications." She touched her face, and Dongwu watched as her skin changed color, becoming slightly transparent. Gill-like slits opened along her neck. Her eyes grew larger, and the glow intensified. "I can breathe the poison atmosphere. I can survive the radiation. I can interface with Vorthan biotechnology, but I cannot do what you must do in the extraction chamber." "And what is that exactly?" "Replace the human psychological template with your own mind pattern. The Vorthan equipment expects someone broken and hopeless. You must show it someone who has survived 20 years alone and never stopped believing." The ship entered Earth's outer atmosphere with barely a whisper. Stealth systems made them invisible to Vorthan sensors, but Dongwu could feel the ship straining under the planet's gravity and atmospheric pressure. Below them, the surface of Earth rushed past like a nightmare landscape. Cities had been torn down and replaced with processing plants. Oceans had been drained to reveal deeper excavation sites. Mountains had been carved into perfect geometric shapes that hurt to look at. "There," Yuna said. "The primary facility. It rose from the planet's surface like a metal mountain, its peak disappearing into the toxic clouds above. Energy conduits ran from the facility in all directions, connecting to extraction grids across the continents. The whole planet had become a single massive machine with this facility as its heart. How do we get inside?" "The facility has multiple levels. The upper levels are administrative and defensive. The middle levels contain processing equipment and storage. The core level, deep underground, contains the consciousness extraction chamber." The ship's bio-walls showed a cross-section of the facility. It went down for kilometers, with the extraction chamber at the very bottom, surrounded by layers of armor and defensive systems. "Vorthan patrol ships," the ship's voice announced. It sounded like wind through leaves, alien but somehow comforting. Dongwu watched as sleek black vessels rose from the facility like angry insects. They moved in perfect formation, scanning the sky with energy beams that cut through the toxic atmosphere. "They know we are here?" "Not yet. This is routine patrol activity, but we need to move quickly." Yuna led him to what she called the deployment chamber. 2 pod-like devices hung from the ceiling, each one just large enough for a single person. They looked organic, like seed pods from some impossible plant. "These are atmospheric entry pods," Yuna explained. "They will protect us during the fall and provide stealth capability until we reach the surface." "Fall? We jump from here. The pods will control our descent and land us near the facility's outer perimeter." Dongwu climbed into his pod, feeling the bio-organic walls adjust to fit his body. The interior was warm and slightly sticky, like being inside a living creature. Neural interface cables connected to ports that Yuna had surgically implanted in his skull the day before. "The pod will monitor your vital signs and provide life support," she said. "Try not to think about the fact that you are falling from orbit in an alien seed pod." Too late for that. The ship's hull opened like a flower blooming in reverse. Toxic wind howled through the chamber, carrying the smell of industrial chemicals and burning rock. Through the opening, Dongwu could see the metal mountain of the HFY facility growing larger below them. "Remember," Yuna called over the wind, "when we reach the extraction chamber, you must interface with the consciousness template directly. The feedback will be intense. You might see memories that are not your own. You might experience emotions from thousands of different minds." How do I stay focused? Remember who you are. Remember 20 years of keeping the light on when everything else went dark. Remember that you are human and humans do not surrender. The pods detached from the ship with a sound like breaking bones. Dongwu felt his stomach drop as they fell through the toxic atmosphere. The pod's walls became transparent, giving him a clear view of the approaching surface. Earth rushed up to meet them at terrifying speed. The facility grew from a distant shape to a massive structure that filled his entire field of view. Energy. Beams from defensive systems swept through the sky around them, but the pod's stealth systems held. "Landing in 30 seconds. The pod's voice whispered in his ear. It sounded like Yuna, but with electronic undertones that made his skin crawl. The facility's outer perimeter was a maze of defensive walls and energy barriers. Guard towers swept the area with searchlights that could burn through steel. Patrol. Vehicles moved along predetermined routes like metal beetles. Dongwu's pod hit the ground with surprising gentleness, its bioorganic structure absorbing the impact. The walls dissolved around him, leaving him standing in the toxic atmosphere of his homeworld, wearing a breathing apparatus that Yuna had constructed from Vorthan biotechnology. Yuna's pod landed beside him, and she emerged looking even more alien than before. Her modifications had activated fully in response to the hostile environment. She moved like liquid mercury, her skin shifting color to match their surroundings. "The extraction chamber is 2 kilometers down," she said. Her voice came through, his communication implant, since speech was impossible in the toxic atmosphere. "We have perhaps 1 hour before the next shift change gives us our best chance to reach the core undetected." They moved through the shadows of the facility's outer structures, avoiding patrols and energy barriers. Dongwu marveled at how Yuna seemed to know exactly where every guard would be, exactly when each searchlight would sweep past their position. "How do you know their patrol patterns?" "I am interfacing with their security network. My modifications allow me to read Vorthan biosignals and predict their behavior patterns." They reached the main entrance, a massive portal guarded by creatures that looked like a cross between insects and machines. Yuna touched the entrance controls and somehow convinced them that she and Dongwu belonged there. "Welcome to the primary consciousness extraction facility," she said as they stepped inside. "Try not to think about the fact that we are walking into the most dangerous place in the galaxy." Around them, the facility hummed with alien machinery and the screams of harvested consciousness. Somewhere below, in the deepest chamber, the essence of Earth itself was being torn away piece by piece. They had 1 hour to save the world. The clock was ticking. The corridors of the facility were alive with organic machinery that pulsed and breathed like living tissue. Dongwu followed Yuna through passages that seemed to grow and shift around them. The walls were covered with neural networks that sparkled with electrical activity, processing the consciousness energy being extracted from Earth's core. "Stay close," Yuna whispered through their communication link. "The facility's biosystems are reading our presence. My modifications are convincing them that we belong here, but the effect is limited. They passed chambers filled with strange equipment that hummed with alien purpose. Through transparent walls, Dongwu could see massive processing units that glowed with harvested consciousness energy. The light was beautiful and terrible, like watching souls being refined into raw power. "How much deeper?" Dongwu asked. "1 more kilometer. The extraction chamber is at the planet's core level." They reached a transport shaft that dropped straight down through the facility's heart. The walls were lined with neural conduits that carried consciousness energy upward from the depths below. As they descended, Dongwu began to hear sounds that made his skin crawl. Voices, human voices. Not speaking or crying, but something worse. The voices were caught in an endless loop of thoughts and memories, playing over and over like broken recordings. Fragments of conversations, pieces of songs, echoes of laughter and tears, all mixed together into a horrible symphony of stolen consciousness. "The harvested minds," Yuna explained, her own voice tight with emotion. "The Vorthons store human consciousness patterns in the facility's neural networks. Every human who was captured, every mind that was scanned, they are all here. Are they alive? Not alive. Not dead. Something in between. Their consciousness exists as data patterns in the facility's memory banks." The transport reached the core level and opened into a chamber so vast that Dongwu could not see the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that defied human understanding. It was part machine, part living organism, part something else entirely. Massive organic pillars supported a central core that pulsed with raw consciousness energy. Neural networks spread across the chamber like a spider web made of light and thought, and everywhere, filling the air like a toxic fog, were the voices of harvested human minds. "The consciousness extraction matrix," Yuna said. "It processes the consciousness energy of an entire planet." As they moved closer to the central core, Dongwu began to make out individual voices in the chaos. A woman singing a lullaby to her child, a man reciting poetry, a child asking why the sky was blue, all the fragments of human experience, torn from their owners and processed like raw materials. "I can hear my sister," Dongwu whispered. He stopped, walking, his whole body trembling. Among the thousands of voices, he could clearly hear Heejin speaking. She was explaining how to repair a damaged circuit board, her voice patient and gentle as it had been when they worked together on the space station. "She is here," he said. "Her consciousness is trapped in this machine." Yuna placed a hand on his shoulder. Through his suit, he could feel the alien warmth of her modified biology. "They are all here, Dongwu. Every human the Vorthons captured. Every mind they scanned. This facility contains the consciousness patterns of millions of people. Can we free them? Not free them. But we can do something better. We can give them purpose." They approached the central core, where the consciousness energy was most concentrated. The air itself seemed thick with harvested thoughts and memories. Dongwu felt the pressure of millions of minds pressing against his own consciousness. At the heart of the extraction matrix was a chamber filled with bioorganic interfaces, cables and neural conduits connected to a central platform where a single figure lay motionless. The figure was human, but barely recognizable as such. Tubes and wires connected to every part of his body. His head was shaved and covered with neural interface ports. His eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing. "The primary template," Yuna explained. "The Vorthons use his mind patterns to calibrate the extraction process. He has been here for 20 years, his consciousness mapped and analyzed over and over again." "Who is he?" "A refugee from the evacuation. Someone who gave up hope when the transports were attacked. His despair, his broken will, that is what the Vorthons use as their baseline for human consciousness." Dongwu stared at the figure on the platform. The man could have been him. Could have been any human who had lost everything and stopped fighting. What do I need to do? Replace him. Connect to the neural interfaces and let the system scan your mind, but instead of despair and hopelessness, you will show it 20 years of stubborn determination, 20 years of refusing to surrender. And then, the feedback will cascade through the entire network. Every harvested consciousness in the facility will be energized by your determination. Instead of being processed as raw energy, they will be broadcast across the galaxy as a signal of hope. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Red lights flashed and Vorthan bioships could be heard moving through the upper levels. "They have detected the intrusion," Yuna said. "We have. Perhaps 10 minutes before they reach this chamber." Dongwu climbed onto the platform, pushing the broken template aside. The man fell to the floor like a discarded puppet, finally free after 20 years of torment. The neural interfaces reached for Dongwu with movements that seemed almost eager. "Wait," he said. "What happens to you?" Yuna was already moving toward the chamber's control systems, her hands interfacing directly with alien biotechnology. "I will maintain the connection and ensure the feedback reaches every consciousness in the network. The energy discharge will be massive. Will you survive?" She turned to look at him, and for a moment her alien modifications faded away. She looked completely human again, beautiful and sad and determined. "I was human once, Dongwu. The Confederation changed me to complete this mission. But they could not change the most important part." "What part?" "The part that refuses to let humanity die in the darkness. The neural interfaces connected to Dongwu's skull with a sensation like ice and lightning." Suddenly he was no longer in his own body. He was floating in a sea of consciousness, surrounded by millions of harvested minds, all crying out in confusion and pain. The facility's extraction system began to scan his mind, expecting to find the familiar patterns of despair and surrender. Instead, it found something that made the entire network shudder with surprise. 20 years of isolation. 20 years of keeping the lights on when everything else had failed. 20 years of stubborn, unreasonable, completely human hope. "The system is overloading," Yuna called out. "The feedback is beginning. Every consciousness in the network is responding to your determination." Around Dongwu, the harvested minds began to change. Instead of fragments of despair, they became voices of defiance. Instead of broken recordings, they became songs of resistance. Millions of human consciousnesses, energized by his example, began to fight back against their captors. The facility shook as massive amounts of consciousness energy began to flow in reverse. Instead of being extracted from Earth, the energy was being broadcast outward, carrying with it the combined will of humanity. Vorthan forces reached the chamber, but it was too late. The feedback had begun and could not be stopped. Yuna looked at Dongwu one last time, her glowing eyes bright with determination and something that might have been love. "You know what to do, human," she said, and then the world exploded in light and consciousness and the stubborn refusal of the human spirit to ever give up. The explosion of consciousness energy tore through the facility like a storm made of pure human will. Dongwu felt his mind expand beyond the boundaries of his body, connecting to millions of harvested human souls, all awakening at the same moment. He was no longer just Captain Dongwu Kim. He was every human who had ever refused to surrender. He was every person who had kept fighting when fighting seemed impossible. He was the collective, stubborn hope of an entire species. The Vorthan extraction matrix, designed to process despair and broken spirits, could not handle this flood of determination. Systems that had operated for 20 years began to fail as they tried to process minds that refused to be processed. Through the neural link, Dongwu could see what was happening throughout the facility. The harvested consciousness patterns were not just being freed from storage, they were being amplified and broadcast. Every human mind that had been trapped in the alien machinery was now part of a transmission that reached across the galaxy. The signal carried more than just thoughts and memories. It carried the essence of what made humans unique in the galaxy. The refusal to accept defeat, the ability to find hope in hopeless situations, the stubborn determination to keep going when every logical reason said to give up. "It is working," Yuna's voice came through the chaos. She was still connected to the facility's control systems, her alien modifications allowing her to direct the massive energy discharge. But Dongwu could feel her strain. The feedback was burning out her neural interfaces one by one. The chamber, filled with blinding light as consciousness energy cascaded through the extraction matrix. The organic pillars that supported the central core began to crack and bleed strange fluids. The Vorthan biotechnology was dying, unable to contain the raw power of human determination. Through the neural link, Dongwu felt the signal spreading, beyond Earth. It reached the Vorthan fleet in orbit first, causing their bioships to convulse and flee. The consciousness broadcast was like poison to their collective mind, showing them something they had never encountered before. Hope that could not be broken. "The signal is reaching other star systems," Yuna reported. Her voice was getting weaker, as her modifications burned out from the strain. "Human refugee colonies are receiving the transmission. They are responding." Dongwu could feel it happening. Scattered groups of human survivors across the galaxy were hearing the call. Not just the words or memories, but the emotional core of what it meant to be human. The part that said, "We do not surrender," even when surrender was the only logical choice. On a dozen worlds, human refugees who had been hiding in fear suddenly stood up straighter. In the darkness between stars, human ships that had been drifting aimlessly suddenly changed course toward home. The consciousness broadcast was not just a message, it was a rallying cry that awakened something primal in the human spirit. But the effect went beyond just humans. Other species in the galaxy, races that had been conquered or enslaved by the Vorthans, were also receiving the signal. They felt the raw determination of a species that refused to be extinguished, and it inspired them to remember their own strength. "The Vorthan command structure is collapsing," Yuna said. "Their collective consciousness cannot process the paradox of hope in hopeless situations. They are retreating from multiple systems." The extraction facility shook as massive explosions echoed from the upper levels. The consciousness feedback was destroying Vorthan technology throughout the complex. 20 years of accumulated consciousness energy was flowing back to where it belonged, and the alien machinery could not survive the process. Dongwu felt his connection to the Matrix beginning to weaken. The neural interfaces were burning out, unable to handle the massive data flow, but it did not matter. The signal had been sent. The message had been delivered. Across the galaxy, beings who had forgotten how to hope were remembering. "Dongwu," Yuna called out, "the facility is collapsing. The consciousness energy is returning to Earth itself. The planet will heal, but we need to disconnect you before the final cascade." "What about the harvested minds? What about my sister?" "They are free. All of them. Their consciousness patterns are being integrated into the planetary restoration process. They will become part of Earth's healing." Through the failing neural link, Dongwu heard his sister's voice one last time. Not trapped and looping as before, but clear and strong and proud. "You did it, brother. You kept the light on until someone could come home." The neural interfaces released him with a sensation like breaking free from deep water. Dongwu collapsed. On the platform, his body weak but his spirit stronger than it had ever been. Around him, the extraction chamber was falling apart as consciousness energy flowed back into Earth's core. Yuna staggered toward him, her alien modifications failing one by one. The glow in her eyes was fading, but her smile was completely human. "We need to leave," she said. "The facility will collapse completely in minutes." They ran through corridors that were dissolving around them. The organic machinery was dying as the stolen consciousness energy returned to its rightful place. Behind them, the extraction matrix collapsed with a sound like a mountain falling. They reached the surface as the entire facility began to sink into the earth. The metal mountain that had dominated the landscape for 20 years was crumbling like a sand castle. Around them, the toxic atmosphere was already beginning to clear as Earth's natural systems awakened from their long sleep. UNA's bioship descended from the clearing sky, its organic hull scarred but functional. They climbed aboard as the extraction facility disappeared completely, leaving only a crater that would someday be filled with clean water. "Look," Yuna whispered. In the distance, green shoots were already beginning to grow from the poisoned Earth. The consciousness energy that had been stolen from Earth was flowing back, carrying with it the memory of forests and oceans and blue skies. The planet was healing itself with impossible speed. The Vorthons? Gone. Their entire fleet has retreated beyond the galactic rim. The consciousness broadcast disrupted their collective mind so severely that they may never recover. They sat in the ship's observation chamber and watched Earth begin to come back to life. The toxic storms were dissipating. The geometric scars on the continents were filling with new growth. In the distance, they could see the first human ships returning home. "What happens now?" Dongwu asked. "Now humanity comes home. The refugee fleets are already heading back to Earth. The Talon Confederation is sending support ships to help with the restoration. Within a year, there will be cities on Earth again." And the consciousness broadcast? It has reached the far edges of the galaxy. Every species that heard it has been changed by it. The Vorthons may be gone, but they have left behind something more valuable than they took. They have shown the galaxy what happens when hope refuses to die. Yuna's modifications were completely gone now. She looked like a normal human woman, tired but victorious. The Confederation wants to study what we did here. They want to understand how human consciousness can be used as a weapon against despair itself. Will you go with them? No. I think I have been away from humanity long enough. I want to stay and help rebuild Earth. I want to remember what it feels like to be completely human again. They watched as the first transport ships landed on Earth's healing surface. Humans stepped out onto their homeworld for the first time in 20 years, breathing clean air and feeling soil that was no longer poisoned. "You know what this means?" Yuna said. "What?" "You are no longer the last man standing. You are the first man home." Dongwu smiled and placed his hand on the ship's transparent wall. Below them, Earth turned green and blue again under a clearing sky. In the distance, human voices could be heard singing songs of homecoming. The 20-year vigil was over. Light had stayed on long enough for everyone to find their way home, and in the depths of space, traveling faster than light itself, the consciousness broadcast continued to spread, a signal of hope and determination that would inspire countless species for generations to come. The galaxy had learned something new about the nature of consciousness and will. It had learned what it meant to be human. Captain Dongwu Kim, the man who had waited alone for 20 years, watched his people come home and knew that every moment of isolation had been worth it. He had kept the light on, and now the darkness was ending. The human solution had worked. Hope had conquered despair, and the galaxy would never be the same again.